They didn't even wait until the roses wilted on my husband's grave. My son looked me in the eyes and said, "Don't expect a dime from the 92 million," then laughed. My chair at the dining table was gone, replaced by a folding one from the garage. No cushion, no dignity. They taped neon stickers on furniture while I was still breathing, claimed memories I built with hands that once made soup from scratch and strategies that built empires. They thought I was finished, fading, easy to erase. But what they didn't know is that I never stopped thinking, and what I built quietly, I would reclaim loudly. This isn't just a story about inheritance. It's about the unseen hands behind it all, and what happens when silence speaks louder than greed. My name is Margaret Landry. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Well, I did, until last week. Until the roses wilted and the vultures circled in pearls and polished loafers. But let me start before the funeral, before the folding chair, before the silence that weighed more than grief. I used to be someone else, not just a widow in orthopedic shoes and a cardigan that smells faintly of mothballs. I used to be sharp, calculated. I could read a balance sheet like a bedtime story and predict a quarterly collapse before the CFO dared to blink. They called me a rising star once, back when I had a name printed on a door, not scribbled on an orange prescription bottle. I was a financial analyst, fifth floor, corner office, the kind with windows that caught the morning sun and coffee always hot. I was 26 when I met Richard Landry. He wore ambition like cologne, loud and lingering. A startup dreamer with more charm than sense. He came to my firm looking for investors, left with my number. It was whirlwind love, the kind that spins before it roots. He made me laugh. I made him lists. He brought flowers to my cubicle. I brought spreadsheets to his late-night meetings. We got married in May under a tree that bloomed pink like something out of a novel. My mother gave me her wedding ring, a gold band with tiny rubies. "In case love needs a reminder," she said. Within a year, I left the office behind. Richard needed help. The business was struggling, and he said he couldn't do it without me. "Just for a few months," he promised. "Then you'll go back to your career." That was the first promised time forgot. Marriage became management of bills, of meals, of moods. I tracked invoices while nursing our son, coded expenses with one hand and burped a baby with the other. Richard, he tried, but the failures came faster than fixes. One client backed out, then another. He started drinking his coffee with bourbon. "It's just the market," he'd say. "It's just bad luck." We sold the second car, then the guest bedroom set. I stopped buying things for myself. My coat got thinner every winter. Richard kept chasing the next pitch, the next investor, but his hands were getting shakier, his words more desperate. Then came the night that changed everything. He came home late, didn't even turn on the lights, just stood in the doorway, tie undone, face gray like rain. I was folding laundry, old towels we'd bleached too many times. He didn't speak, just handed me a letter from the bank. The red stamp said it all. Final notice. Collateral requested. "I just need something to secure the deal," he whispered. "Just a bit longer, Maggie. I swear." He went to bed without dinner. I stayed up, pulled the velvet box from the back of the drawer. Inside were pieces of my past, the gold bangles from our engagement, the emerald brooch my grandmother gave me when I graduated, and my mother's wedding ring. I laid them out on the table, each one glowing like a decision I couldn't undo. At sunrise, I walked to the jeweler down on Jefferson Street. They offered less than it was worth, of course. I didn't argue. I wired the money to the business account by 9 a.m. No one knew, not even Richard. Later that week, he closed the deal, called it divine timing, said he'd found a way. I nodded, stirred the soup, bit my lip so I wouldn't speak. He never asked where the money came from. I never told him. And just like that, I became invisible. 6 months later, the market shifted again. Investors were spooked. Competitors pivoted. Richard's company, despite its temporary lifeline, was once again teetering. But this time, I didn't just stay up folding towels, I stayed up drafting salvation. At the kitchen table, long after the children were asleep and the house had gone still, I sharpened a pencil and unrolled a sheet of blank paper. Not a spreadsheet this time. A plan. A full proposal, page after page. Supply chain restructuring, phased growth targets, scalable implementation metrics. I even outlined investor psychology touchpoints based on market cycles. It wasn't just smart, it was airtight. My hands trembled from exhaustion, my back ached, but I kept writing until the first light slipped through the blinds. By dawn, the floor around me was covered in crumpled drafts, but the final version, clean, confident, and clear, lay ready on the table. I didn't sign my name. I wrote instead, Hartwell, a pen name I'd once used in college, back when I thought I'd write financial thrillers one day. I sealed the envelope, added the company's address, and mailed it from the pharmacy down the block. No return address, no fanfare. Richard received it 2 days later. He called it a miracle document. Said someone out there still believed in him. He brought it to the next board meeting with all the gusto of a man reborn. 3 weeks later, the company secured a pre-IPO investment round worth millions. 6 months after that, they went public, valued at $94 million on day one. The headlines sang his name. Visionary leader rescues Southern tech firm, they wrote. Brightwood strategy built on grit and genius. He wore a new suit every week after that, switched his bourbon to aged scotch, bought a boat, then a second home on the lake. Every plaque, every award, every article named him the mind behind it all. And I didn't mind, at least not then, because in those early days, I still believed it was worth it. That survival was the goal, and credit was irrelevant. Richard had survived. The family was stable. The kids had full tuition and braces and spring break trips. The pantry was full again. I traded applause for peace. At night, he would fall asleep with the TV humming and the stock ticker running. I would lie beside him, staring at the ceiling, whispering equations I used to solve in my head like lullabies. And then the days started blending. I stopped renewing my professional license, donated my old textbooks, took down the framed certification from the hallway and replaced it with one of his press features. My pen name disappeared into a drawer, curled and yellowing. My hands, once used for drafting balance sheets, now stirred soups and scrubbed bathtubs. It wasn't sorrowful, not entirely, just silent. Until it wasn't. Until the funeral. Richard collapsed in his office chair on a Thursday afternoon. Cardiac arrest, no warning, no goodbye. 1 minute he was reading quarterly reports, the next he was gone. I planned the service. I chose the hymns. I laid out his favorite cufflinks and held the trembling hands of distant cousins who never knew the real him. People came in droves, men in tailored suits, women in sleek black dresses with polished nails and solemn eyes. They spoke about a man of vision, a legacy maker, a self-built king. I stood near the back, holding a copy of the obituary I'd written myself. Nowhere in it did it mention me. The house filled quickly afterward, not with mourners, but with opportunists. The same investors he once wowed, former employees, local news, friends of board members, and of course, our children. Joseph, our eldest, arrived in a rented SUV and loafers that had never seen a scuff. Clarissa trailed behind him, face tight and dry-eyed. Catherine and Ethan, my grandchildren, skipped hugs and went straight for the dining room, where the silverware drawers had already been half pulled open. I poured tea for myself. No one asked if I needed help. No one even offered a chair. I stood by the staircase, the same one Richard and I sanded ourselves 30 years ago, watching them move like bees without a queen, loud, hungry, eager. Someone made a joke in the kitchen about dusty inheritance. Clarissa laughed. Joseph popped a bottle of champagne. Catherine slapped a bright green sticker on the grandfather clock and said, "This one's mine." I looked around and realized something terrifyingly clear. I had already been erased. No one asked how I was doing. No one even looked me in the eye. The man they came to grieve was half mine, but now I was nothing more than the woman who once shared a mailbox with him. And so I stood there, black dress, trembling hand, calloused heart, holding the weight of every page I'd written in silence. They called him the genius. I called him the man I once loved enough to disappear for. The lilies from the casket hadn't even wilted when they started claiming pieces of me. They returned to the house like it was a showroom, not a home. My home. The same one I had scrubbed, stitched, and sacrificed for. They entered with rolling suitcases and Bluetooth speakers. Laughter echoed through the foyer as if grief were just a minor inconvenience. Joseph, my son, wore dark sunglasses indoors, pacing the hallway like a real estate agent ready to make a pitch. "Let's be efficient," he said, clapping his hands once. "We've all got flights to catch." Clarissa, his wife, had a clipboard in one hand and a champagne flute in the other. "I've made a list based on priority," she said cheerfully, as if they were organizing a wedding registry. "Sentimental things go to the kids. Essentials stay in the family. The rest, well, donation or estate sale." I stood in the archway of the living room, watching them assign ownership to memories. Catherine slapped another neon sticker onto the piano bench. "This one's mine," she declared, pulling out her phone to snap a picture. "I want the art above the fireplace," Ethan said. "Dad said I could have it when I turned 18. "You were 8 when you saw that painting," I said softly. No one heard me, or they chose not to. Joseph walked past me without looking up. "Clarissa, have we set up the forwarding address for Mom's pension mail?" She glanced up from her list. "Working on it. Might as well get the checks rerouted. Easier that way." My mouth went dry. Clarissa turned to me, as if just remembering I existed. "By the way, Margaret," she said, adjusting her designer scarf, "we've cleared the laundry room. It's warm and quiet. You'll have privacy." "The laundry room?" I asked. "It's more of a utility space," she corrected, smiling tightly. "But cozy. We've moved a cot in there. Just temporary, of course. Once things settle, we'll look into other options." Joseph added, "No point keeping the master suite empty. Catherine and Ethan are staying the weekend." They didn't ask. They didn't explain. They just moved me. My suitcase had already been placed beside the mop bucket. They'd even folded my sweaters, labeled them seasonal donate, and tucked them into a box behind the water heater. On top of it was a framed photo from my 30th anniversary. It was cracked, crooked, and hidden. Dinner that evening was a blur. Not because of the food, but because of what was missing. My chair at the dining table had vanished, replaced with a folding metal one from the garage. One leg wobbled and there was no cushion. No one noticed when I sat. No one offered to pass the bread. The toasts were loud, full of bravado. "To Dad," Joseph announced, raising his glass. "A true empire builder." "A legacy man," Ethan added. "They said he could see 10 years ahead," Clarissa chimed. "He couldn't see his own wife," I whispered, but the silverware clinked and the laughter drowned it out. After the plates were cleared, Catherine wandered into the mudroom where I sat, sipping tea I'd reheated myself. She glanced around, wrinkled her nose. "Smells like bleach and old socks in here," she muttered. She opened the cabinet, pulled out a bottle of cleaner, then spotted my stack of unopened mail on the shelf. "You still get paper statements?" she asked, eyes gleaming. "Guess we could keep those coming. Might help with forwarding pension stuff." I blinked. She grinned. "Kidding, mostly." Mostly. I looked down at the paper plate in my lap. Dry chicken, mashed potatoes like paste, no salt, no warmth. I was invisible in my own kitchen. Margaret Landry, widow, mother, financial architect of a silent empire, reduced to a shadow behind the laundry soap. My granddaughter, my blood, had just joked about keeping my checks after I was gone. That was the moment. Not the cot, not the folding chair, not even the cracked photo frame. It was that offhand remark delivered between sips of sparkling water that took the air from my lungs. They were waiting for me to disappear. No, they had already decided I had. The next morning, the house was already humming. Boxes slid across hardwood. Tape screeched. Laughter drifted from upstairs as Catherine and Ethan argued over who would claim the antique armoire. The one my father-in-law built, the one I polished every Easter. I sat in the mudroom, not bothering to open the blinds, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee. No cream left. Clarissa had said they were simplifying groceries. I could hear Joseph's voice from the living room. "Clarissa, list the sideboard on that auction app you use. It's probably worth something vintage." Vintage? The word hung like a mosquito in my ear. A chill crawled up my spine. I stood slowly, my knees cracking, and moved to the hallway. The sideboard. That wasn't just any furniture, it was the gift from my mother after Richard and I got engaged. Solid walnut. Custom carvings of magnolias along the edges. I used to tuck love notes to Richard in the top drawer during our first year of marriage. I walked into the room and stood before it. No notes now. Just a neon orange sticker that read, "Claimed." I reached down and opened the drawer. Empty. Not just of contents, of scent. It no longer smelled like rosewood and lavender sachets. It smelled like detachment. Curious, I wandered into the guest room where Ethan had left his laptop open. He was in the kitchen, arguing about muffins. On the screen was a browser tab still active, antiquemarketplacelive.com. My heart knocked once, hard. I leaned closer. There it was. Early 20th century heirloom china cabinet, excellent condition, $6,500 or best offer. My cabinet, my china. The set I only used on Christmas morning, when the kids were small and still believed in magic. The listing photos were taken last night. I recognized the lighting. The fingerprint smudge on the glass was mine. Another listing showed up below it. Hand-carved southern sideboard, inherited piece, pickup only. That wasn't donation. That wasn't sentimental division. That was theft. I swallowed hard and backed out of the room, pulse thudding in my ears. They weren't just forgetting me. They were erasing me for profit. I returned to the mudroom, sat in silence for several minutes. Then, like a whisper from my past self, I remembered something. Behind the dryer, beneath the loose panel, where the foundation slightly dipped, was a space. Years ago, when Richard's company first began to succeed, I had hidden something there. Not because I didn't trust him, but because the world didn't trust women like me. I pulled the dryer forward with more strength than I expected. Dust and lint clouded the air, but I pressed on. My fingers found the edge of the wooden panel. I pried it back. The folder was still there, wrapped in a faded towel, bound in cracked leather. Heavy. Inside, the air shifted. This wasn't just memory. This was evidence. I laid the folder on my lap and opened it. Page after page of typed and handwritten documents, old proposals, financial memos, a letter of intent from a major investor dated years before the IPO, notes from phone calls I'd transcribed, including figures that never made it to the final report. A copy of the original proposal, the one I'd mailed under the name L. Hartwell, my handwriting on every page, and at the very bottom, taped to a faded legal envelope, was a scanned document from the Patent Office, Intellectual Property Clause. My pseudonym registered as the concept originator, not Richard, not Brightwood Industries, me, Margaret Landry, forgotten homemaker, invisible mind. I had built it. The stabilization strategy, the expansion model, the equity rollout timeline. Every piece of the IPO's bones had come from these tired, overlooked hands. I sat very still for a long time. The sound of footsteps above, drawers opening and closing, the chirp of a phone notification, all faded. I had let myself believe they wouldn't see me because I had chosen the shadows. But now they weren't just refusing to see me. They were selling the shadows too. I pressed my palm flat against the folder. I could feel the weight of my own erasure vibrating through it. No more. Not out of vengeance, not even out of pride, but because someone had to remember what I'd done. I stood slowly, placing the folder into an old tote bag, wrapping it in a cardigan I hadn't worn in years. Later that evening, I would find the quietest room in the house. Our old office, the one Joseph now called his claim. I would sit at the desk I had sanded beneath the lamp I once picked out from the thrift store and begin reading every page again, line by line, preparing. They thought I was lost in the fog of old age. They thought the years had softened me into forgetfulness. But I remembered numbers. I remembered details. I remembered who I was before I traded my last name for theirs. And as I tucked the final page back into the folder and closed it with a click, I said it aloud just once. They've forgotten who I used to be, but I haven't. And then, quieter, just to myself, in the language I once spoke fluently in boardrooms and mergers and long nights of balance sheets, they forgot I used to count, and I still do. It was early, just past sunrise, when I stepped outside for the first time in 3 days. The air was thick with humidity, as if even the sky in Baton Rouge wanted to sweat out the truth. I walked the 4 blocks to the pharmacy, folder pressed tightly against my chest, tote bag cutting into my shoulder. My old phone, the one with the floral case Joseph said was too outdated to bother fixing, had been left unplugged. They'd accidentally canceled my service while switching plans, so I didn't bother with cell towers. I needed a signal older than that. The payphone still stood beside the vending machines, chipped blue paint and all. A relic, like me. I slipped in 2 quarters, lifted the receiver, and dialed from memory. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, calm and familiar. Alden Law Office. It's Margaret Landry, I said, and even saying my name felt like a reclamation. There was a pause. Then came the response. It's time? Yes, I whispered. It's time. Alden had been Richard's lawyer for decades, our lawyer, technically, but what my family never knew was that he'd also been my legal advisor, separately and quietly, ever since the early years of Brightwood's near collapse. Back when Richard feared the company might implode, and I feared becoming the ghost of a man's failed ambition. Back then, I insisted we draw up a document listing me as a silent co-founder, not for fame, not even for protection, but for proof. He told me, most women don't ask for this. I told him, most women regret not asking. We made copies, signed with initials, tucked them into folders like seeds waiting to bloom, and now I was ready to water them. By the time I arrived at Alden's modest office downtown, the sun had begun clawing its way up the skyline. The receptionist, a kind-eyed woman named Irene, who remembered my birthday every year, offered tea. I declined. I'm not here to be comforted, I said gently. I'm here to be seen. Alden met me at the doorway, older now, slower than I remembered, but with the same eyes, sharp, calculating kind. I take it you have something for me, he said, gesturing to the tote bag. I placed it on the polished oak table in his office. Quietly, I pulled out the folder, laid it flat, opened it with fingers steadier than they'd been in years. The first page, a printed draft of the Brightwood IPO model, typed, annotated, and signed L. Hartwell. Alden lifted it, scanned the margins, then glanced up at me. This is the original. Yes. The second page, an official letter from the Patent Office, verifying the strategic model as protected intellectual property, registered under the same pseudonym. Then the next, copies of internal memos from Richard's desk, with my handwriting in the margins. I pointed to a notation on a Q3 forecast. Remove duplicates before submission. This will undercut investor trust. Richard used that exact phrase in his board meeting. I had watched the recording from the hallway. Then came the final item, a small USB. I found this in his safe after the funeral, I said. It wasn't password protected, just labeled audio just in case. Alden inserted it into his laptop. The speaker crackled. And then Richard's voice, tired, gravelly, but unmistakably clear. If anything ever happens to me, he began, and the kids come after her, remind them who actually built the thing. Remind them who stayed up writing pitch decks while I drank myself numb. Margaret. It was always Margaret. I was just the front. I closed my eyes. Even in death, he still couldn't say it to my face. But he said it. That was enough. Alden leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyebrows furrowed in focus. You understand the gravity of this, Margaret? I nodded. It's not just validation, he continued. It's ownership, the intellectual property, the royalty streams, the licensing agreements, depending on how we position this. You may hold more of Brightwood's bones than the current board does. I didn't flinch. I don't want revenge, I said. He smiled. That's what makes it powerful. We spent the next hour cataloging the evidence. He made duplicates, called in a junior associate to notarize the originals, set appointments with a handwriting analyst from the university. This won't be quick, he warned, but it will be clean. I've waited this long, I said, folding my hands in my lap. I can wait a little more. As I rose to leave, Alden placed the folder back into my tote, now lined with legal seals and stamped dates. At the door, I turned. Can I ask you something? Of course. When this goes public, when they find out who I really am, do you think they'll care? He considered this. No, he said truthfully, but they'll remember. That was enough for me. I stepped back into the sunlight, folder warm against my side, and whispered into the breeze, I'm not here to be remembered fondly. I'm here to be remembered accurately. 2 days later, I returned to Alden's office. He'd asked for time to verify, cross-reference, confirm the legal weight of each page. I gave him exactly 48 hours. It was the first time in years I'd given anyone a deadline. He greeted me without his usual pleasantries. There's something we need to discuss, he said, motioning me inside. I sat across from him at the same oak desk, the folder now spread open between us like a confession. His reading glasses were perched low, his fingers tapping against a highlighted section of a decades-old document. This, he said, is the reason I called you back so quickly. He slid the paper toward me. It was a scanned copy of a contract from 2007 buried within the founding agreements of Brightwood Industries. A joint ownership clause, co-executor status, typical of married business partners. But near the bottom, tucked beneath a line of boilerplate legalese, was a sentence underlined in red. In the event of the co-founder's death, all remaining intellectual property shall revert in full to the surviving co-founder as sole proprietor and executor of original strategic assets. I read it once, then again, then a third time. I don't remember seeing this when we signed, I said slowly. You probably didn't, Alden replied. It was in the appendix. Richard's version had it buried, but I compared your original signed copy with the official Brightwood filing. This clause was never removed, which means it's valid, legally binding, and effective immediately. I stared at the words, effective immediately. You're not just entitled to royalties, Margaret, he said. You own the IP, all of it. Every clause, every strategy, every licensing contract tied to the Brightwood IPO model. And given the scale of licensing, that translates to approximately 70% of the company's current market value. I blinked. 70. Conservatively. The Brightwood stabilization framework is still the backbone of every partnership contract they've signed in the last decade. That patent, registered under your pseudonym, is the core. My pulse drummed beneath my ribcage, but I didn't smile, not yet. And my children, I asked. They have no idea, Alden said plainly. They never reviewed corporate governance paperwork. Frankly, I doubt they even knew your name was on the founding documents. Of course they didn't. They saw me as nothing more than a faded shadow behind their father's success, a woman who made soup, not decisions. But they'll find out soon, I murmured. Alden leaned forward. Not unless you want them to. That made me pause. What do you mean? He pulled another file from his drawer. This one, thinner, newer. The board hasn't been informed yet, nor has the family. Per your rights as sole proprietor of the core assets, you're within legal bounds to act without notifying secondary stakeholders. I narrowed my eyes. Act how? If you choose, he said slowly, we could initiate asset reclamation. Now, before the will is read, you'd have the right to freeze any sale of intellectual property, remove personal effects held in corporate trust, and yes, legally evict anyone residing in the estate without a signed living arrangement. He let the words hang. You could make them leave today, Margaret. I looked down at my hands, still calloused, still strong, still mine. Eviction, immediate control. No ceremony, no performance, just precision. They think I'm waiting for the will, I said softly. They do. They think all I have is grief. Alden didn't reply. I stared at the ceiling, then at the folder, then at the thin line of ink confirming what I had long buried. Proof. Proof that while they mocked my memory, I had preserved legacy. Proof that while they slapped stickers on heirlooms, I owned the blueprint of their lifestyle. And yet, something inside me hesitated, not out of pity, but strategy. They'll be there, I said finally, at the reading, all of them, hungry, certain, smug. Alden nodded. Let them sit, I continued. Let them toast, let them talk. Let them gamble on futures they don't own. I reached for the folder, smoothed the cover flat with both hands. Then, I said, voice steady, I'll speak. Alden tilted his head. So you don't want to evict them now? No, I said, lips curling ever so slightly. I want them comfortable. I want them relaxed. I want them confident they've won. I stood. But I'll need you to prepare something for the will reading. Of course. What? A letter, I said, turning to the door, and a ledger. One that counts everything I gave, every idea I wrote, every silence I allowed. Alden chuckled, low and warm. You're still the sharpest strategist I know. I glanced over my shoulder. Richard built the empire, I said, but I drew the map. And now I was ready to take it back. The law office smelled of glass cleaner and ambition. Sleek leather chairs lined the conference room, each one pulled out slightly as if in welcome. A carafe of cucumber water sweated quietly on a silver tray in the corner. The walls were lined with degrees and oak bookshelves, but the energy inside was anything but dignified. They arrived in waves. Joseph entered first, hair slicked back, suit so sharply pressed it could slice air. Clarissa trailed behind him in a navy sheath dress, her heels clicking with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this arrival. She smiled at the receptionist, then immediately began whispering into Joseph's ear. Catherine and Ethan followed moments later. Catherine held her phone upright, already recording footage for a TikTok story. She whispered to Ethan, #Legacy Day. He smirked, adjusted his cufflinks, and said, "About time." I was the last to arrive. No one looked up. No one stood. No one said my name. Alden greeted me with a silent nod and gestured toward the seat furthest from the head of the table, one of the few without armrests. Folding chair, of course. I walked across the room, past the murmurs and perfume and practiced silence. The air conditioner hissed. No one offered me water. "Let's begin," Alden said, flipping open a thick leather folder. His voice, calm and crisp, sliced through the anticipation. As executor of the estate of the late Richard Landry, I am here today to administer the distribution of his will, last revised and notarized under Louisiana state law. Clarissa leaned in slightly, lips curled. Joseph adjusted his tie. Ethan pulled a pair of AirPods from his pocket. Catherine rolled her eyes and kept recording. "Before we begin," Alden continued, "per Mr. Landry's written request, we will play an audio recording made 2 weeks prior to his passing." Joseph frowned. "Wait, he left an audio file?" Alden pressed play without answering. And then Richard's voice filled the room, not the booming voice from boardrooms or holiday toasts. This one was slower, measured, ragged but unmistakably firm. "If my son ever speaks ill of his mother," the voice began, "deduct $1 million from his inheritance for each word." The silence in the room cracked like ice. Clarissa sat up straighter. Joseph scoffed. "What the hell is this?" Richard's voice continued. "This is not a joke. This is recorded on the kitchen microphone, 3 days after my death. Verified, preserved. I told Alden to keep it." Alden turned the page in his folder. "Exhibit A," he said, sliding it forward. "Transcript, verified by a third-party audio analyst." He cleared his throat. "Day of recording. Joseph Landry. Multiple statements made. Quoted, 'She's still breathing. Thought she'd be gone by now.' Followed by, 'Maybe we should check her pulse at the reading.'" Joseph's face drained of color. Clarissa's hand went to her chest. Alden continued reading. "She built soup. He built an empire." Ethan laughed once, then quickly stopped. Richard's voice chimed in again from the speaker. "You know how many he owes." There was a pause in the audio. Then, "That's 88 words. 88 million. Apply penalty." Catherine's phone slipped from her hand, landing face down on the table with a thud. This is insane," Joseph muttered, standing halfway. "This isn't legal. You can't—" Alden lifted one hand, calm as ever. "Clause 14C, subparagraph 3. It's real, verified, witnessed, signed, and triggered by his own mouth." The room had shifted. You could feel it. The temperature didn't drop, but the gravity did. Joseph fell back into his chair, dazed. Alden closed the transcript folder with care. After penalties, Joseph Landry's adjusted inheritance stands at $3,120. No assets, no property, no board seats, just the amount remaining after mandatory tax retention. Clarissa gasped, blinking rapidly. Ethan mouthed, "Oh my God." Catherine sat perfectly still. I did not smile. I did not move, but my hands no longer shook. Alden wasn't finished. "There's more," he said. Mr. Landry recorded this, knowing it might cause emotional response. He added an instruction for this specific moment. He reached into a smaller folder, pulled out a thin silver USB. "This," he said, "is a voice memo. It's only 30 seconds long." He clicked play again. Richard's voice, fainter this time, came through the speakers. "If you're hearing this, then Margaret is still in the room. And if she is, then let it be known. She was never the ghost you mistook her for. I built the shell, but she built the structure. You laughed at the hands that fed you, and now you'll understand what those hands truly held." The audio clicked off. No one spoke. Clarissa stared at the floor. Joseph gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles paled. Catherine picked up her phone and shut off the camera. And I, sitting on that folding chair at the end of a glass-walled conference room, finally exhaled. Not in victory, not even in satisfaction, but in recognition. I hadn't been invisible. I'd just been underestimated. Alden turned to me then, offering the next folder gently. "This is the beginning," he said. Alden let the silence settle. Not as a pause, but as punctuation. He had always been precise like that, knowing when words did more harm than quiet, and when quiet could echo louder than outrage. Joseph sat stiff, hands still clenched on the polished table. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but no sound came. Clarissa didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. Her mascara had begun to smudge at the edges. Ethan was tapping his knee, rhythmically, as if trying to wake himself up from a very inconvenient dream. Catherine held her phone under the table, staring at the black screen like it might offer a reset button. And me? I sat in the same chair, back straight, hands folded, not triumphant, but ready. Alden cleared his throat again, this time with a different tone, quieter but resolute. "Now," he said, "we move to the primary beneficiary clause." He opened a sealed envelope, the gold crest of the Landry Family Trust shining in the light. As of the latest revision, all intellectual property related to the Brightwood IPO, as well as 68% of post-IPO equity, existing royalty streams, and residual licensing contracts are to be transferred into the sole possession of Margaret Elise Landry. He slid the signed directive across the table, rotating it gently so it faced me. And in accordance with that, the remaining shares not held by outside investors, amounting to a controlling interest in Brightwood Industries, will also transfer to Mrs. Landry, including full voting power and seat entitlement. Catherine's phone slipped from her hands again, this time hitting the carpet silently. Ethan blinked. "Wait, what?" Joseph looked at Alden. "That's impossible. She's not even listed on the—" "She is," Alden interrupted. "She always was." His voice was firm, not loud, but final. She was listed as co-founder in the initial incorporation documents, as the author of the stabilization model, as the originator of the strategy, and as executor of the IP trust upon Richard Landry's death. A second envelope was placed on the table, this one smaller, thinner, red wax seal. This was left by Mr. Landry to be opened only if the previous clause was contested. "Do you wish to contest?" No one spoke. Alden broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter, written by hand. Ink faded slightly at the edges. He didn't read it aloud at first. He passed it to me. I unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of old wood and ink, of his office, of him. "Maggie, I know I asked too much of you. I know you let me shine when the light belonged to both of us. I should have said thank you. I should have said your name in every meeting. I should have worn your words like armor and not passed them off as my own. You let me be the face because the board wouldn't follow a woman. And I let that become truth, when it should have only been strategy. This empire was never mine alone. You were the blueprint, the spine, the spark, and now that I'm gone, I want them to know. I want them to finally see. Thank you for letting me shine, but now it's your turn to be seen. R." I folded the letter slowly, like tucking a memory into my pocket. Then I placed it gently in front of me. Joseph finally found his voice. "So what now?" he asked, voice cracking. "She gets everything?" Alden didn't answer. I did. I stood, chair creaking behind me. The room tensed, not from volume, but from presence. For once, they were all looking at me, really looking. And I looked back, at the son who forgot I once held his hand through fevered nights, at the daughter-in-law who treated my life as a clearance sale, at the grandchildren who never once asked what I did before casseroles and quietness. I looked at them all. Then I said, clearly, evenly, "Today, I think it's time you all learn to listen when a woman speaks." And then I sat back down, not out of exhaustion, but elegance. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, not remorse, confusion. She was too young to understand that silence could be a form of strength, too used to the idea that power must be loud. Joseph leaned forward, elbows on the table, shame rising behind his eyes, but not yet touching his mouth. Clarissa spoke finally. "We didn't know," she whispered. I turned toward her, not cruelly, not coldly, just honest. "No," I replied. "You never asked." Alden gathered the papers into neat piles. "There are additional logistics, but the primary transfer is complete," he said. "The board has already been informed. The trust will be renamed under Mrs. Landry's sole signature." No one argued. No one could. I reached for the pen he offered, signed once, firm, clean, then stood again. They made space for me this time. Not because I demanded it, but because they finally understood whose space it was to begin with. As I reached the door, Alden's voice followed me softly. "Enjoy the silence, Margaret." I paused just once, turned, and said, "I earned it." The house was quiet when I returned. Not just silent, empty, hollow. No laughter, no heels, no stickers slapped on heirlooms. The air felt clean, scrubbed of entitlement, like the walls themselves had exhaled. I didn't rush. I set my coat on the hook by the door just as I had for 40 years. The same hook Richard once reinforced after it came loose the week Catherine was born. "Small things matter," he'd said. Funny, how small things often outlast everything else. I walked through the hallway slowly. The floorboards creaked under my weight, not in protest, but in recognition. My shoes knew this would. My hands had sanded and stained it once, back when we couldn't afford contractors and ambition was all we had. The sun slanted through the front windows, warm and soft, painting the room gold. Dust floated like ghosts. They were gone. All of them. The stickers weren't, though. Bright neon post-its still clung to furniture like bruises. "This one's mine," claimed, for Catherine. For Dad said I could. I moved to the dining room first. The china cabinet stood tall against the wall, glass doors slightly ajar. Catherine had left a green sticker on the top left corner. "This one's mine." I peeled it off slowly. The sound was delicate, like paper sighing. I didn't throw it away. I folded it in half, then again, and slipped it into my pocket. I walked to the rocking chair next. My rocking chair. The one where I'd nursed Joseph through chicken pox, cradled him until the fever broke. He used to curl his fingers around mine, even when he was too big for the motion. It had a yellow sticker now. For Ethan. I peeled it off, folded it too. Each room carried a piece of me. In the study, I found the oak desk where I wrote letters to Richard's family, trying to explain why we couldn't afford Christmas that year. I found a small envelope tucked in the top drawer, one I'd forgotten about. Inside was a crayon drawing, a house with stick figures, a dog with 3 legs, and a woman with glasses labeled Mom. Joseph's handwriting, uneven, 5 years old. No sticker there. No one had wanted the memories without price tags. In the kitchen, I found Clarissa's favorite pan already packed in a box. She'd labeled it with her initials, circled in hearts. I didn't unpack it, I just smiled. She never knew that pan had a dent in the base, an old war wound from when I dropped it the day I got the call about Richard's failed first pitch. I'd cried for 3 hours that day, then made stew. In the linen closet, I touched each towel like a memory. One embroidered with our initials, one faded pink, stained with red clay from Ethan's soccer game, one bleached nearly white from too many cleanings, used when Catherine cut her finger on the porch rail. I peeled more stickers, one after another, carefully, reverently, until my pockets were full of folded claims and the house was bare again, not of furniture, but of assumptions. I paused at the grand piano, Richard's piano. They hadn't dared sticker it. It was sacred, even to them. He used to play at night, poorly but with joy, Chopin and old blues, sometimes just chords when words failed us. That piano had heard more confessions than any priest. I lifted the lid gently, then closed it again. Some things don't need to be touched to be felt. Finally, I reached the bedroom. Our bedroom. The bed was stripped, the sheets folded and stacked like laundry in purgatory. The vanity mirror still held fingerprints. Mine, his. Some smudged with time, others recent. On the nightstand sat my wedding photo. They'd left it behind, not because it didn't matter, because it didn't matter to them. I picked it up. We were young in it, so impossibly young. My dress modest, his tie crooked. We were smiling, not because we knew what was coming, but because we didn't. The picture frame had a crack across the corner, probably dropped, probably not noticed. I ran my thumb along the glass, then set it down gently, and for the first time in days, I spoke out loud. This was never yours to divide. Not out of anger, but truth. They had tried to slice a life into pieces and claim it with neon ink. But lives don't work that way. Homes don't work that way. Love doesn't fit into post-it squares. I stepped outside to the back porch. The sun had dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the garden. The pomegranate tree still stood. Bare branches, crooked, tired, but standing. And beneath it, almost hidden, was the tiny rose bush I planted the year Joseph turned 5. He helped me water it every day for a week, then forgot. I didn't. It had one stem left, brittle, thorny, fighting. I knelt beside it, knees against the warm tile, and brushed away the dry soil. No sticker here either. Just roots. Just memory. I fetched the watering can from behind the shed, rusted but still whole. I filled it slowly, then returned to the rose and poured, gentle as prayer. The soil drank. The roots held. I whispered, "You're still mine." Then added, quieter, "I don't need the couch, or the cabinet, or the china." I placed all the folded stickers into the garden bed, one by one, pressing them into the dirt like apologies. I just need what remembers me back. And the earth, in its quiet way, remembered. 3 weeks later, a sleek black and gold sign appeared on the iron gate of the Landry estate. "Property under contract," neighbors whispered. The mailman paused. Even the birds seemed quieter. After nearly 4 decades of Margaret Landry being the quiet woman behind the curtains, no one expected her to be the one selling the house. But I did it quietly, efficiently, like every decision I'd made since I stopped apologizing for being underestimated. I didn't list it publicly. Alden connected me with a preservationist couple from New Orleans, people who valued history, not just marble countertops. They walked through the home with reverence, not hunger. The wife cried at the sight of the rose bush. The husband asked if they could keep the hooks by the door. That was enough for me. We closed the deal in 4 days. The funds cleared in 6, and on the 7th, I opened the account, the Unseen Hands Foundation. The name came to me in the garden, after all the stickers were gone, after I'd whispered into the soil, because that's who we were. Women like me, the ones who stirred soup, filed taxes, wiped tears, and stayed up past midnight fixing PowerPoint decks someone else would present. The ones who remembered birthdays, held the camera, paid the light bill, and asked for nothing in return. The women whose fingerprints were on everything, but names on nothing. The fund wouldn't be flashy. No gala, no photo shoots, just scholarships, legal aid, seed capital for forgotten dreams. I wired the first $500,000 that same afternoon. Then I changed the locks. The house was no longer mine. Not because I'd lost it, but because I'd outgrown it. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom near the lake. Sunlight, silence, space for a small herb garden. Peace lived in the walls there. No echoes of slammed doors or laughter laced with expectation. Just stillness. And then the emails came, then the letters, then the calls, all from them. Joseph first. A voicemail, tentative. "Mom, I know things got messy. I just thought maybe we could talk?" Then Clarissa, more formal. "We understand the fund is growing fast. We'd love to help organize, use our contacts, build awareness." Catherine sent a long email full of buzzwords: empowerment, visibility, social impact. She ended with, "Would love to co-host a launch brunch. We could invite influencers, do press." Even Ethan reached out, texted a photo of a pitch deck. "Startups for senior women. We could scale this." They all wanted in. They didn't want me. They wanted my movement, my voice, my value, now that it was loud enough to echo. I sat in my new kitchen sipping chamomile tea, reading their pleas on my old iPad. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vindication. I felt nothing. Because they weren't reaching out to rebuild. They were reaching out to be seen with the woman they once erased. I replied to none of them until the day Clarissa showed up, unannounced, immaculate. Lipstick perfect. She stood on my porch holding a bouquet of peonies. I didn't invite her in. "We just want to help," she said, voice trembling slightly. "You've built something powerful, and we want to make it bigger." I looked at her. This woman who once offered me unscented shampoo like charity, who whispered about inheritance while I was still pouring coffee. I stepped onto the porch, gently closed the door behind me, and stood with her in the soft light of early spring. She extended the bouquet. I didn't take it. "I'm not angry," I said. She smiled, too quickly. "But I'm also not naive." Her expression faltered. "You weren't just absent," I continued. "You were active in the erasure. And now, you want to hold the shovel and the seeds." Clarissa opened her mouth. I raised a hand. "I don't need help building this," I said. "But the network," she started. I cut in. "I don't need people who once buried me alive to help me plant." The words landed like thunder, not screamed, not dramatic, just true. She stepped back. I nodded once, turned and opened the door, paused. "If you ever want to donate anonymously, the website's public," I said. Then I closed the door behind me, not to shut her out, but to keep myself in. Later that night, I pressed the button on the Foundation's site to publish the mission statement. It read, "We are the hands they didn't see, the voices they didn't hear, but we remember. And now, we build, not to be noticed, but to be unerasable." And at the bottom, in small, steady font, founded by M.E. Landry. The ocean doesn't speak loudly, it breathes, in, out, like a woman who has finally laid down her armor, not because she gave up, but because she no longer needed to wear it. I moved into the penthouse in Santa Barbara on a Monday morning. It was simple. 2 bedrooms, wide windows, white curtains that fluttered even without wind. The floor was pale oak. The walls warm cream, no crown molding, no chandeliers, just air and space and light. The realtor asked if I wanted to repaint. I told her no. Silence didn't need color. It needed room. The balcony overlooked the sea, not crashing waves like some coastal dramas, just steady tides, rhythmic, endlessly patient. I placed 1 chair out there, just one. I no longer needed to accommodate people who only sat beside me when there was something to gain. The first night, I slept without dreams, and in the morning, I unpacked my life, not in boxes of things, but gestures, a tea set from my mother, a lamp I found at a thrift store in 1982, a photo of the rose bush in bloom, framed in brass, and of course, the sign. It had arrived 2 days after I moved in, shipped from a small wood-carving shop in Louisiana. I'd sent them part of the old oak from the Landry estate, the one Richard and I planted when we first moved in. Before the titles and the whispers and the stickers, it had split in a storm years ago. I'd saved a piece. Now it was carved with 11 words. "This house was built by a burden. Enjoy the silence." I hung it beside the front door, just under the mailbox. The mailman laughed softly the first time he saw it. "Hell of a motto," he said. I smiled. "It's not a motto, it's a memory." Every month, the royalties from the IPO patent arrived, quietly, predictably, not through some public celebration or applause, but as digital whispers into the account that fed the foundation. The unseen hands had grown faster than I expected. Letters poured in. Women from all over the country, a retired professor who had ghostwritten textbooks for male colleagues, a grandmother who'd co-founded a bakery but never saw her name on the sign, a woman who designed the first pitch deck of $1 million startup, then was let go before launch. They weren't angry. They were exhausted. Invisible doesn't mean absent. Forgotten doesn't mean never there. So we helped. 1 grant at a time, 1 tuition check, 1 quiet lawyer referral, 1 seed fund for a midlife career restart. No spotlight, just fuel. That was enough. One morning, while watering the potted basil on my balcony, I thought about how different the air felt here. No one demanded explanations. No one measured me by usefulness. No one taped post-it notes on my legacy. Here, I was just Margaret. Or as the staff at the corner cafe started calling me, Ms. M. I liked that. I wore linen, loose, breathable. My hair turned silver without apology. I stopped wearing lipstick. No one noticed. The world had finally grown quiet enough for me to hear myself think, out loud, and yet I didn't fill that space with noise. I wrote letters, real ones, to women I'd once known. A former co-worker who taught me to be firm without raising my voice, a high school friend who gave up a scholarship to care for her siblings, a neighbor who used to whisper ideas during PTA meetings but never took credit. I told them they were seen, that they weren't just support beams, they were architects. I ended every letter the same way. They didn't write your name on the building, so I'm writing it here. Then one day, I received a package. No return address. Inside, a faded crayon drawing of a woman with big glasses and a giant light bulb over her head. In crooked purple handwriting, it read, "To Grandma, you think better than Google." I sat with that drawing in my lap for nearly an hour, not crying, not even smiling, just remembering. The woman they once thought could be erased had become a lighthouse. Not loud, not flashing, but unmovable. And finally, seen. It came on a Thursday afternoon, folded inside a plain envelope. No name on the outside, just a return address printed in soft gray ink from a co-working space in downtown Austin. I almost threw it away, but something, maybe intuition, maybe a ghost of memory, made me pause and open it carefully. Inside, a letter, 3 pages, neatly typed, margins precise. A familiar form of control. I'd used the same formatting myself decades ago when I wanted to be taken seriously by men in rooms too loud to hear me. The letter began, "Dear Grandma Margaret, I don't know if I deserve to call you that anymore. Maybe I never did, but I hope you'll read this anyway." I set my tea down. It was from Catherine, the same girl who once taped her name to my wedding china, who laughed at the smell of mothballs, who live-streamed my erasure with perfectly winged eyeliner and a sparkling filter. I want to say sorry. I know. Everyone says that when they realize the inheritance wasn't theirs. But this isn't about money. I swear. I saw what you built. I read the articles, the foundation, the fund, the women who wrote about how you helped them, and I realized I never asked what you did, who you were, what you wanted. I only saw a grandmother who made soup, but you were building the blueprint of something far bigger, and I never looked up long enough to see it. I took a breath, folded the first page, turned to the second. I'm building something now, or I'm trying to. It's small, a social impact platform that connects mid-career women with underfunded mentors in underserved communities. Kind of like a bridge between corporate exit and community leadership. It's messy, unscalable, probably doomed, but I care about it. And every time I feel stuck, I think about you, the woman who never raised her voice, but somehow made everything stand. I don't know if you believe in second chances. I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know that I finally see it. You weren't background. You were backbone. Thank you. Catherine. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat in the silence, letting her words settle like dust on old furniture. Familiar, overdue, but somehow gentle. Then I turned over the last page. Attached was a 1-page summary. Project Hatchlight, a pilot for purposeful transition in women's lives. It wasn't bad. In fact, it was promising. Clear objectives, sensible pilot locations, a realistic funding ask. She'd done her homework. I stared at her name, typed neatly at the bottom. And then I folded the papers back into the envelope, placed them into my drawer, and made tea. That night, I transferred the funds. Not a fortune, just enough to launch the first cohort, cover mentorship stipends, and pay one staff member full-time for 6 months. I didn't sign my name. I routed it through the unseen hands. Anonymous giving. No trail. Because this wasn't about redemption. It was about legacy. Not mine. Hers. I didn't forgive Catherine in that moment, not because I held a grudge, but because forgiveness wasn't the currency. Belief was. Belief that women deserved more than one mistake to prove their worth. Belief that even the ones who erased others could still learn to write a new story. I watched the confirmation email arrive. Plain, no fanfare, just a string of numbers and the name of her project on the memo line. Then I stood, walked to the window, and watched the waves again. In, out, in, out. That weekend, I received another letter. This one was different, handwritten, messier. It simply said, "We got the grant. I don't know who gave it, but I think I do. Thank you for letting me bloom. I'll make it count. Love, C." I pinned that one to the fridge, next to the old drawing, the one with the stick figure grandma and the purple crayon bubble letters. "You think better than Google." I smiled at it gently and whispered, "Now they know."